Ready to start recording?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, let's begin the meeting of the Lehigh County Authority Board of Directors, May 9th, 2022. This meeting is being held either in person, on Zoom, or on telephone call for all participants. If anybody cannot hear or be heard, please let us know, and we can discuss that. Information has been sent out in advance for the meeting, either electronically, both electronically and hard copy to the Board of Directors. And there have been no other further communications after that. Okay, let's go through the Board of Directors roll call.
All right, roll call of the board. Ryan Noggle.
Here.
Scott Bieber.
Here.
Dick Bonner. Norma Kingston.
Here.
Tom Lyons. Kevin Baker. Linda Rosenfeld.
Here.
Morgan.
Here.
Amir Kamili.
Here.
We have 6 board members present, which is a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. We use the agenda and then second.
We have no changes to the agenda for today and no executive sessions planned.
We now turn to the approval of the April 25th, 2022 board meeting notes. Our secretary is absent today, illness. He has reviewed the documents and has indicated that there's no changes are necessary. I need a motion and a second for approval of those minutes.
Motion.
Second.
All right, we got Amir for the motion and second by Scott. Thank you, Lily. Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much. At this time, we open up the floor to any public for comments on items that are not on the agenda. Does anybody wish to speak?
I have none.
Thank you. Moving into the action and discussion items. First on the agenda is the Chief Executive Officer salary seeking approval. At the conclusion, after the conclusion of last board meeting, we had an executive session and the presentation was made by the CEO, and the board discussed the salary options for the current year. We have received in our email today a recommendation that was developed during that discussion. Since it's a confidential document, any questions? And I'd like a motion and a second for approval of that information as presented.
So moved.
All right, we got Linda on this one as a motion and second by Amir. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. Moving on to the next topic, suburban water and sewer facilities. SCADA system upgrade. It's our blue documents in our board package, digitally board package, pages 8 through 11.
All right, so for this one, Chris Mon will be reviewing the SCADA project, and I just wanted to highlight before he digs into it that we have a typo over here that it says water and wastewater. This is really a water-only project, but he can describe more about the project. And we have a presentation to go through some of the details, which I'll share on screen. Presentation was posted to the website and emailed to everyone. Chris, are you ready for me to share?
I am.
Take it away.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about the suburban water system today, and we're going to talk about our SCADA system upgrade. It has been talked about since I've been here, and recently with a lot of the system issues we've been seeing, we've decided it's time to kind of bite the bullet and move forward with this project. Next slide, Lisa. Real quick, some high-level definitions of what SCADA is. So SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. And ultimately, it is a control system that can use computers, network communications, whether it's internal, cellular, dial-up. and GUIs, which are graphical user interfaces, which you generally see as the touch screens or reporting screens for the systems. And the employees would use those for supervision, control of all of our assets and processes that run at each of our stations. It does include monitoring of sensors and the PLCs, which are the hardware components that live at each of the individual stations. And they're the programmable logic controllers. And these interface directly with the SCADA software, which ultimately creates the screens that allows our staff to have control and visibility into the systems as they're operating. Next screen, Lisa. Over time, we've had quite a few challenges. First and foremost, inconsistent communication. We currently have a mix of radio, dial-up, and cellular systems that all operate individually within multiple software systems. So what this means is that our guys, when they're monitoring systems, when they're on call overnight, they are literally getting pages on a pager, texts on a cell phone, phone calls from an on-call agent that we have. So it poses problems in the sense that we are looking for information in multiple different places. Because of the age of the infrastructure, we lack internal expertise. We just recently had an issue, and I was glad to see our new SCADA analyst has joined the call. Not that I'm going to ask him any questions and put him on the spot, but we had an issue here at Suburban where we had some failover, and we were looking for replacement components in case the worst had happened, and we were unable to find any. Luckily, Dale and George Lill, our SCADA supervisor, were able to get our system back up and running, and we're running flawlessly right now. But it was a bit of a moment of panic where this couldn't have happened at a worse time. And in this day and age, for me personally, as kind of an IT guy, the lack of remote access is a huge issue. Oftentimes, the guys will get an alarm on a pager, have to drive into the main office to look at the system to acknowledge an alarm that could have been done remotely if we had the right systems in place. Delayed responses in this regard can and have led to regulatory noncompliance, which boil water advisories to a couple of our remote locations. Okay, Lisa. So what we've done in this project is we are going to focus on our 42 suburban water field assets. That includes well stations, pumping stations, meter stations, and reservoirs. We're going to develop a standardized build out for 5 of our common facility types. And what this will allow us to do is work with our vendors to have standardized build outs that we could have a core set, have individual modifications here and there for the ones that are a little bit different. It will allow us to develop standard cabinets, so we can have our cabinet shop as part of this project, build out in a controlled environment, standardized cabinets. It'll allow easier maintenance, easier readability, and will be consistent across all of our stations. So as we're onboarding new employees, it'll be easier to train, maintain, and allow them to get up to speed quicker. Next bullet point says the contractor must have their own cabinet shop on premise. That was a big thing for us. We wanted to make sure that whomever we engaged with on this project can build and deliver all of these cabinets in a timely fashion, especially with the issues that we're having now with supply chain. So it was important that the contractor would be the provider of the cabinets. We didn't want our contractor to sub a sub situation. And this ultimately will be a 4-year project starting this year and then being completed, we're hoping by mid-2025. So for phase 1, excuse me, since it's a short year, we chose a few of our highest priority water facilities, one in central Lehigh, 4 remote satellite systems, and then phases 2 through 4, we will address from 2023 to 2025. I think a good point to note at this juncture is at the end of each phase year, what we'll do is we'll evaluate what's been completed, and we'll evaluate any issues that we had seen in the current year to see if we need to shift or adjust the stations that we're going to work on in the upcoming year. It was the beauty of having those kind of 5 standard build outs. It allows us to be able to shift gears a little bit in case of, we start seeing some major issues at one of the stations that we thought would be in a later phase. We could move it up without any issue to the schedule. Okay, Liesl? So here are some big benefits. I'm a huge staff development person. What this is going to do is it's going to get our entire suburban field staff on the same plane. Right now, we do have, people who have been here for longer than some of the newer guys, and they know some of the systems better than some of the newer guys. What this is going to do is it's going to level the playing field. It's going to allow our new SCADA analyst to develop and build his knowledge up as the project moves on. The companies that we're engaging with and the software that we're using have tremendous training built right into the packages themselves that comes as part of our licensing. So there's no additional fees there. So as we onboard new people, Keystone Engineering will be building out design templates and training templates for each of the systems that we're upgrading. And then these can be used as we onboard new people. Single platform for alarming, which I mentioned earlier was a big hassle. Reporting, so all of the reporting that we'll need to do for DEP, internal management, and our historian, which is the server database. Right now, we collect data in a couple different locations, and we have to do aggregations when we want to do our giant reports. It's going to give us the ability to have secure remote access for all of our staff. This will allow our guys who are on call on a Saturday night, rather than having to drive in to check an alarm that they see, they'll be able to pull it up on their iPad. They'll be able to see, acknowledge, and address situations real time from their home. This one is a big one here. And it ties into the first bullet point. With training and development, the system that we're implementing allows us to control unlimited future growth. The new system that we're purchasing is hardware agnostic, which is really nice. So that means regardless of supply chain issues that we may see, it will allow us to develop our SCADA overlay seamlessly and internally. And again, increase response times, which just rolls right into improved service to our customers, less chance of any sort of violations, and a much lower regulatory compliance risk. And I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions? I know this has been a topic historically in the past, and I would gladly answer any questions that anybody may have.
And Chris, before we get into any questions, I do want to make a statement that we have put this presentation together specifically to share information that we feel is appropriate for the board. And if we get into too much technical detail, we would want that to be protected and handled in executive session, because cybersecurity is protected information that we want to be careful about. So
I was going to ask for all the passwords.
that's a hard no. So with that caveat, questions or discussion?
I have a question, Chris. This is great, and I think it's going to really help us. How does Allentown match up with SCADA situation?
Right now, the Allentown SCADA situation, so Allentown runs the same platform at our water and wastewater treatment plants, but neither of those systems, as it stands right now, have any public access. So they are in a situation that the only way to check stuff is internally with internal staff. That being said, the education that we're getting from this piece of software and the security that's built into the software and the way they manage their OSI layers in the network, it opens up some possibilities for us to allow management. So if Andrew was at home and we were having a huge rain event and he wanted to check flows at the wastewater plant, this project that we're doing in Suburban ultimately will pay dividends for Andrew at the wastewater plant. We've discussed internally some testing that we can do to verify security. I mean, for me, knowing where I come from, security is paramount. First and foremost, it has to be secure before we even think about it. And the ignition system that we're talking about installing would be able to fill that easily.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Other board questions?
So, Chris, I have a question. Can you just clarify, actually, I'll ask you offline. I have a couple of technical questions, just out of curiosity, but nothing really that's critical. But can you just explain the pricing? So is the price from OCC for the next 5 years, and then Keystone's gonna be doing work at the authorization each year, or is that just for the first?
You're correct. So OCC, let's say we approve the request. OCC is engaged for 4 years, them, their cabinet shop, and all the hardware. Keystone is doing yearly PSAs, and we approached it that way because we do feel that there's going to be shifts in phase from year 1 to 4, depending on priority of stations in the field. It's easier to manage in smaller chunks in that regard. So we decided to do 1 chunk for OCC and then 4 PSAs for Keystone Engineering Group.
Okay, thank you. That makes a lot more sense.
Chris, there's 42 facilities that are included within this. Does that cover everything, or are there other facilities that might come in the future for requests for expansion of the SCADA system?
So that covers all of our existing water facilities. Part of this is, as well, Brian, is training internal staff to be able to make the changes to existing systems like Sandspring that would roll them right into this new SCADA system as well. We've been really impressed with the support from Keystone Engineering Group, and the software that we've chosen is very, very user-friendly. So internally, we can start rolling in stations that fall outside of the scope of project.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I would just make a comment. I've actually worked with both OCC and Keystone. Keystone's definitely done a good job on a number of projects over the years. And OCC's been around for a while as well.
Yeah, we were real happy. We had a couple local people, and if you look at the memorandum, the 2 locals were right in line with each other. So we were really happy to see that the prices were so close. We're actually doing a tour pending today's approval of OCC's cabinet shop tomorrow.
Questions by the board? Comments?
Make a motion
Okay.
for approval.
Made by Jeff for approval of Urban Division Capital Project Authorization Construction Phase for $3,055,421. Second. Second by Ted. And that includes a construction contract with Optimum Controls Corporation, OCC, for $2,670,421, and includes a professional services authorization Keystone Engineering for the first year for $235,000. And any questions? Let's do a roll call on this, please.
All right, before I do the roll call, I did want to recognize that Ted came in to the meeting, and Kevin Baker is also in the meeting now, so for the bulk of the presentation. So for the approval of the SCADA project, Ryan Noggle,
Yes.
Scott Bieber,
Yes.
Norma Cusick,
Yes.
Ted Lyons,
Yes.
Kevin Baker,
Yes.
Cindy Rosenfeld,
Yes.
Jeff Morgan,
Yes.
Amir Famili.
Yes.
That's 8 yes votes. Thank you very much.
All right, big project.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, moving on to the next topic is underwater 2022 commercial meter replacement project repair. Seeking approval. It is a salmon documents in our board package, digital board package, pages 12 through 14.
Yes, and for this one, Chuck Volk is here along with Amy Kunkel from the Capital Works Department.
Okay, thanks, Liesl.
Yeah, Amy Kunkel, Capital Works Engineer, is going to present this project. We're doing a small commercial meter replacement project this year to replace about 145 1.5 inch and 2 inch commercial meters that have reached the end of their useful life and maybe under-reporting or not reporting at all. So this is a timely project. Amy's going to get into some of the details on this project. Amy?
Okay, yes, Chuck said, we're looking at about 145 of our, commercial meters. We looked at ones 15 years and older, to replace, for this round. They've reached the end of their useful life. We're doing this as part of a service contract, professional service contract with Core in Maine. They're the authorized dealer for census projects or products in this area. And census is the meters that we use in suburban. So they have done the previous projects that we did, the previous radio project and residential meter replacements. The difference is now they have their service contract on CoStars, so we can procure them through CoStars. They're using an installer called Bevo Solutions to do it. They have plenty of experience with these commercial type installs that are a little trickier than your residential. It's going to require some more coordination with possible shutdowns if they don't have bypasses and off time hours to get them done, be it at night or on weekends, that type of thing. So they're scattered throughout the suburban division. We did it by age rather than location. So that's what we received a price from Core in Maine. I compared it against some previous prices that we've gotten from them, and it falls in line with what we've seen before. So I'm making the recommendation that we move forward with this. There is a lead time once we have this excuse me, approved in getting the meters. Like with everything else, there's lead time. So we'd be looking at starting this probably in September this year, but they said they can have it completed by the end of this year.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the board?
I have a question. This is a negotiated contract. There's no bids involved here. It's negotiated.
Correct.
What's our cost control on this? How do we know this number is a good number?
Well, like I said, I compared, the unit prices against, previous prices we've gotten. It was reasonable increase
The
for,
previous ones you got were from them.
correct.
So you're comparing them to them. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just, as a board member.
Yeah.
Do they do an open book? Can we see, we want them to make money, no doubt, but I just wonder what our control mechanism is here.
Yeah, the CoStars program itself sort of enforces that. And we looked at the meter prices, and unlike everything else, they didn't go up a whole lot. It's in line with our prior projects that we did, that we went through conventional bidding. With this one, we want to take advantage of CoStars in the interest of time, cut down the bidding time and the price is right. So we're convinced that it's competitive.
Well, if this is your CoStars, what happens is that at the state level, they bid out the contracts. And so then the local municipality or authority can then rely upon what the state has done. So state bids out contracts for thousands of types of products or services, and then you're just basically piggybacking on what the state has done.
Okay, so
That makes sense.
it's locale neutral or service area neutral or
Yes,
one size fits all. That's
yeah,
Good.
yeah, it's statewide services. So the most typical thing people use CoStar for is buying vehicles. Because
I can see that.
Yeah.
But others are have the opportunity to bid on the project, correct?
At the
Or
state, at the
At
state.
the state level?
Yeah.
Okay. And did anybody else bid on this project at all?
I'm not aware of that. At the state.
All right, as long as you're all comfortable.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So will this improve your meter reading? Or any of these meters really old that are still manually? And so that'll also make things a little bit more efficient?
Yeah, I don't know offhand how many are not reporting at all. But we think there's a lot of, as they age, they can under-report us. So we could realize some marginally increased revenue as a result of the project.
Right. And then just the other part of it is without publicly bidding it, you don't have the design, the bidding process, all of that. You've saved all of that going through CoStars, right? So they've taken care of that part of it before. And actually, CoStars more and more is actually trending toward construction services and major repairs and purchase of equipment. I'm sure you guys have seen this. I have another project where they decided to buy an entire UV disinfection system through CoStars, and then they bid the contracting, the labor of it publicly, and have it installed. So there's a lot of that moving in that direction. People are using it more and more than just bidding everything. So
Question on the 145 facilities that are being worked on under this. Will there be future requests for other the same? Just say, like, what percentage is 145 of the total in that size meter?
It's a good question. I'm not sure offhand.
I don't know how many we have in that 1.5 and 2 inch. But eventually, I think we'd like to get it where there's kind of rolling projects as these meters age out. That we do them every couple of years, possibly even every year, depending on, whether it's commercial or residential, so that we don't end up with every so often having a huge project, trying to get it more frequent and a little more manageable.
We do have the next project coming up in 2025, and it's over 6,000 meters, ranging in size from 5/8 inch to 1 inch. So those are a lot of residential meters, and that's the next batch that's aging out.
Okay. So it's a continuing process and replacing, and eventually you'll come back around to even these in 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
In this particular category, the 1.5 to 2 inch, it's kind of our largest base of commercial customers, but our total commercial, like larger meter customer base at Suburban is about 700 customers total, 700 to 900 in that range. So it's a sizable chunk of that universe.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Looking for a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ted and seconded by Linda.
Yep.
For capital project authorization 2022 Suburban Division, commercial replacement size is 1.5 to 2 inch. For a total of $432,207.63. The contract award commercial meter replacement project to Core and Main LP professional service contract included in the capital project authorization were $367,207.63. Roll call, please.
Yes. Okay, so approval of the meter project, Brian Noggle,
Yes.
Scott Bieber,
Yes.
Norman Cusick,
yes,
Ed Lyon,
Yes.
Kevin Baker,
Yes.
Ginger Rosenfeld,
yes,
Morgan,
Yes.
Mayor Camilli.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Amy. Thank you. All right, moving on. Let's see, we have wastewater, we have a sanitary sewer collection system, rain derived inflow and infiltration. It's a discussion topic. We did not receive anything in our hard packet, but I think there was something mailed out for presentation on,
Yes.
and also on our website.
Yes, we do have a presentation for this, and this item is on the agenda in response to a request of the last board meeting to hear more about the results of the inflow and infiltration study that was done earlier this year that we've been talking quite a bit about. So Phil, you can tee it up even more if you'd like. We also have Jim Shelton here from Arcadis, who we haven't seen in a little while. So he did the work and can share share the slides with us. But Phil, do you want to introduce any more on this?
I'm sure I'll just give a quick background. If you remember, we put in about 70 temporary meters last March. 70 temporary meters, then we had additional meters that were already installed, the permanent sewer billing meters. So it was about 100 meters total. And that was from March until about Halloween of last year. And Jim's been QAQCing the data, and then he rolled right into this analysis. And then we met with all the signatories in March of this year, individually. And then we presented this information at the April big KISS meeting we had. And then Jim's going to follow up with basically that same presentation from April.
So the presentation was shared with the board in advance and posted on the website. And Jim, are you ready for me to share screen?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Where's yours?
Thank you. So one slight correction on what Phil said. So the giant data gathering task that we went through last year, its primary purpose was to calibrate hydraulic model for the system that's being used for the 537 planning process. So a lot that went into that. We had all the meters. There was a lot of QA/QC, probably one of the most QA/QC data sets I've ever been involved with, because there's so much that rides on this from a capital standpoint. One of the things we realized was, though, that we could repurpose some of this data for more than just calibrating the model, really get more than one bang out of the buck, if you will, for what we were doing. And so we pitched it, and ultimately was accepted by all the signatories, that we would do an independent evaluation of what the data was telling us about the nature of the leakage that's coming into each of the different catchments. Now, I hope you can appreciate what that meant. You've got all those signatories up there, not all of whom are had their information shared before, now all on a single platform. So it provided a single, one period of time, highly vetted analysis of where the leakage is coming from. And a lot of this was in response to what DEP was asking us. So this figure shows the entire Klein's Island sewer system. It's just under 1,000 miles of pipe. We're about a quarter of that system. Allentown's about half, and the other signatories comprise the remaining quarter. All the little yellow circles that you see are meters that were put in for the course of the modeling effort. Now, most of these meters were on the interceptors and trunk lines, right? That's where we put them to calibrate the model. So they weren't all perfectly situated for doing RDII analysis. So we were very clear as we went through our analysis, where we had results that were rock solid, where we had results that were a little questionable, and where we had results where, you know, we just can't use these data, this flow meter, for this type of analysis. All told, there were about 100 meters that broke everything down into about 90 individual basins. Now, a basin is nothing more than a point where all the sewers kind of flow through a single point. There's nothing magical about it. There's nothing locked in. It's just where, for the purposes of optimizing how much we spent on metering, we were going to put them. Another metering program might have different basins, but we call those meter locations basins. So keep that in your mind. Because we're building a hydraulic model, we also need rainfall data, right? So you're using this flow data to calibrate what happens when it rains, because the rain does leak into the system and it can dramatically change how much flow comes in. So we spread the rain gauges throughout the system. These are all the triangles that you see up there. Now, can you go back one figure for me? One of the things you might notice here is that there's a preponderance of yellow circles not in the Lehigh County Authority system. You might recollect I did a presentation 2 years ago when we calibrated our portion of the model using 2019 data. So when we did it 2 years ago, we had about 45 meters in and about 15 rain gauges. We've put a handful of meters into our system to kind of bring them in line and make sure that they mesh gears. When we bring that 25% of the system calibrated into this. So that's why it doesn't look like we've got good distribution. It's because all we're doing is meshing up with what we did before. Go ahead, please. So what you've got now is a series of rain gauges and about 100 meters. And what happens from that is the rain gauges are collecting rain. Those are the blue lines that you see at the top, the dark blue lines. And we collect those from there were about 30 locations in 5-minute increments. You're collecting flow data from these meters, generally in 5-minute increments. Now, there are some permanent meters that are only collecting them in 15-minute increments. So it's not true across the board. For the most part, it was every 5 minutes. And these data were all QA/QC. What you see in the green line here is the actual flow data. This happens to be, as you can see from the dark blue, when it rained. That light blue line at the bottom, the blue curve, that's what comes out of the statistical analysis of all the dry day flows. So that's what happens on a day like today, right? When it's not raining, that's typically, well, that is what you see. And that's done all the Mondays, all the Tuesdays, all the Wednesdays are all grouped together. And each one has its own average signature. And in residential neighborhoods, it's surprisingly consistent. In industrial neighborhoods, it's not at all consistent, right? The big industries discharge when they want to discharge. What you end up getting now is when it rains, a dramatic change in some basins, not all, but in this particular one, this is an actual rain gauge or a meter station rather. You get the blue line is normal and the green line is what happens when it rains. If you notice on the left side, that's your 1,000,000 gallons a day. So in this particular one, you're at about 750,000 gallons per day, 3/4 million gallons. And when it rains, you can see the peaks going up to about 4 or 5 for this. The area that's between those two curves, that's the volume of excess flow that comes into the system. When we define that volume, typically we're doing it by one of two things. It's either when the storm, the green data come back and match the blue data at the bottom. Sometimes they do that within 12 hours on tight basins. In really bad basins, it might take a week. And then for the purposes of our analysis, we usually demarcate that at 3 days later, at 72 hours. The last piece I want to point out here is that blue line on the bottom, the blue curve, which is your average flow on a dry day. At the nighttime, in the dark of the night, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, most people aren't up using their facilities during that time. And so the vast majority of the flow that's coming into the sewer at that time of the day is groundwater leaking into the system. Now, not all of it is, but generally somewhere between 80 and 90%. And the rule of thumb is 90% is the number that's typically grabbed. And so that's informative as well. So for instance, on this particular one, if your average daily flow is about 750,000 gallons, and your nighttime flow is 500,000 gallons, you can see that in this particular basin, 2 out of 3 gallons flowing through the sewer in the middle of the night, I'm sorry, on a normal day, not in the middle of the night, 2 out of 3 gallons that go through that location are pure, clean, cold groundwater. And you can see that our crews have been out in the systems for the last 8 weeks, doing nighttime weiring to check that with much smaller granularity that these meters provide. And when you're down there, it's cold, crystal clear water coming in at 3 o'clock at night. So we have this, go ahead to the next slide. We have these for all of the storms that we experienced in 2021. For the purposes of our analysis, we picked the top 6 storms. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the next slide is Ida. I think Ida isn't here. Yeah, Ida. So, and what you go back 1 slide for me. What this does for us is it gives us an idea of how the system gets stressed under different rainfall conditions, right? So there's really 2 things you want to think about for that. One is what happens when it rains and it's been dry. What happens when it rains and it just rained 2 days before. So as we're calibrating the model and we're evaluating response, that one on the bottom left corner is really instructive for us because that's August 19th and then August 23rd, right? You've got 4 or 5 days in there. And even though those 2 storms were about the same size, look at the area under the curve for the green line for the second storm, right? And that's exactly what we've always experienced in our system. Antecedent conditions are what kill us time and time again. So we did this, these 6 storms, 5 slides, 6 storms for every single basin, every single meter that was out there. And when you look at that, if you're experienced, you can make certain conclusions. And it might be hard for you to see, but on the bottom left corner, look at that's the August 19th event. If you look at the rain event, you notice it's got 2 downpours, right? The bigger that blue line, the more intense it was. And notice the green lines, how they respond almost 1 for 1, right? So stuff like that tells you a great deal that, hey, this is a basin that's not only impacted by the mains, the taps, the risers, and the laterals leaking, but you've got sheet inflow coming into the manholes, right? You've got places where the lawn services clipped off the clean out, and now the whole lawn is acting as an area drain. And so when you get enough sheet runoff happening, it comes in and starts flowing right in. We call that inflow, right? All the rest of it is coming in through the leaking sewers, right? And that's the rainfall-induced infiltration. So a trained analyst can go and look at this and deconstruct these and make certain conclusions about what's going on. Go ahead, Lisa. Keep going. And we do that here. So there's 2 ways of looking at this. There's the qualitative, I'm going to evaluate the shape of these curves, and there's the numeric. I'm going to go and do some statistics that come into this. So you've got a basin, it's got its name, its footage, how many parcels are there. In this particular case, it's a meter that's downstream of another meter. So you've got a net where you're going to subtract the upstream meters data from the downstream to draw conclusions about the area in between those 2 meters. And that's your total and your net. So we look at dry, so there's some basic statistics that we look at. There's dry weather flow. So this is how much is coming from these houses on a dry day basis. Typical in our system is about 160 gallons a day. So this, just looking at it at first blush, probably tells us that this meter has a lot of baseline infiltration. And of course, when you go back to that graphic that I was showing, this goes to those graphs I showed you. You know, you're looking at about 70% of the flow coming out of this basin is pure crystal clear groundwater, right? So that tells you a lot there. You also look at, go back 1 slide for me. You also look at the blue line versus the peak of the green line to tell you the peaking factor. Because when we have overflows from our system, the volume comes into play, but it's also just how peaky is the system? How big is it? How much more flow as a factor of the base flow do we have? Go ahead. So in this particular one, not particularly bad, right? So its average over those 6 storms is only about 2.9 for this particular basin. Think about your math, though. Your denominator is driven 2/3 by infiltration, right? So if this basin was tight, if you didn't have all that leakage in it, these peaking factors might be 7s or 8s, right? So you've got to think about what they mean relatively. The last thing we look at is that area under the curve, right? That total volume. So that's your rainfall derived INI. That's the sum of all the inflow and all the rainfall induced infiltration. And it's just MGD, right? You bound it by those start and end of the storm. That's hard to look at. So we then just take that and divide it by the size of the basin to give you an idea of what that basin size is. And then in addition to that, we look at the hydrographs and we say, what does the hydrograph tell me? So those hydrographs tell me that we've got places where there's at least one, and in this case, probably quite a few, manhole frames and covers, chimneys and clip cleanouts that are going underwater. We also know that we have a high rainfall derived INI. It's taking days for the system to French drain the water out of the system. We draw some conclusions about what the statistics say. And then from there, we use, we say, what should we do next? These meters are at the bottom of 15 to 25 miles of pipe. You can't do an actionable item out of that. It's just too big, too expensive to do everything there. Not all of the parts of that car leak or have problems, if you will, right? So you only want to do the pieces that leak. So SSES stands for Sanitary Sewer Evaluation Survey. It's an old 1970s technique that's just held on. And it's what are the next steps you do for taking 25 miles and trying to find actionable half-mile, 1 mile, 3 mile areas to do work with. And so these are the techniques that we do. So for this particular basin, we said, go out and do nighttime INI work. Let's go find out which areas are leaking and not leaking. And then because we have those horns in the system where it really peaks up from the inflow, let's go out and find out what manholes are going underwater. You better walk the yards to figure out what landscaper clipped off how many plastic riser cleanouts, because all those things are causing problems. So we did all that. And for all of this, there's a big spreadsheet. You have the spreadsheet.
There is one in here.
But it susses off to, really 3 things. Think about the analogy I like to use here is baseball, right? You can never define a baseball player by just one statistic, right? Runs batted in doesn't define it. Batting average alone tells you nothing about his defense. So when we think about INI, it really susses off into 3 primary statistics that are interrelated, but also kind of independent. The first is peaking factor. And we've color coded this as a heat map. Typically, if you've got a system that's getting a significant rain event, which these 6 storms would have been, and you're getting a peaking factor less than 4, it's not so bad. Now, the regulators might say 4 is still awfully high. You'd like to see it down in the 3 or even the 2, but it's really not practical, especially in older systems. And 4 is generally accepted in the engineering community as decently performing. It's not the worst kid in the class, if you will. And then it just works its way up. 4 to 5, there's stuff there from an inflow standpoint to go get. Once you're above 5, that's a system that's causing problems in the trunk lines and interceptors. That's a system that's leading to overflows. And then, of course, you get to the 6s to 10s is the reds, and then the pinks are the really, really bad ones. That's where it's over 10. So this gives you an idea of where we're seeing leakage. Now, those peak factors can happen for just 10 or 20 minutes or an hour. They're not typically long-lasting things, but they can cause overflows. So you want to look at those attributes of how the system responds. The second thing you want to look at is that baseline infiltration. Baseline infiltration is also a great idea of how much is going to leak through the sewer systems themselves when it rains as well. So it's really good that way. Less than 20% is a tight system. A new PVC installed system, that's probably about what you would expect from a fairly new system or a system that's very well maintained. You'll notice there's not a tremendous amount of green. You don't expect much of that. Where you want to live is in the 20 to 33% range. And these are systems that are leaky, but they're not horrendous. What you're going to find in there are developments, and these are almost always development driven because it's the contractor's construction that drives a lot of this, as well as age. So you want to try and go and find those. As you work your way through the oranges to the reds and the pinks, I mean, you're gonna find bad pipes no matter where you go, and they're very, very badly leaking pipes, because you know, a half to 2/3 of the flow coming through those is groundwater. You'll notice that there's a strong correlation for a lot of this with the older portions of the Kleins Island sewer system. Emmaus's, Salisbury, portions of the city. I would have said 10 years ago, if we had done this 10 years ago, Emmaus and Albertus would have lit up bright pink, right? But that's one of the real success stories that we've had is Albertus and Makunji's numbers are dramatically different now than they were a decade ago, all thanks to their efforts. The last thing I want to talk about is the normalized RDII, kind of falls into that same band. Again, color coded along the same lines. And you can see generally the LCA portions of the system are pretty good. The only areas that we really seem to have issues with are Bridings right now. We're trying to run that to ground. If you've noticed, that little red area through there has been lit up on all of these. There's something going on coming out of the Bridings area that wasn't going on a decade ago. And we're trying to run that to ground. We don't have the answer to that, but we're getting there. In the end, all of these are just graphicals. There's a spreadsheet that we have that looks at all these statistics and break everything out, basin by basin, signatory by signatory. This was all shared in great detail with each of the signatories in each of the Western Lehigh sewer partners individually. Then we had a meeting in this room, it was packed, where we went over all of this with all of them together. And it was generally accepted. There were a couple that were, I don't believe your numbers, but only a couple. Most of them were right in line with it. Conclusions out of this is that, as would be expected, generally the older systems are the leakiest, but there's not a signatory that doesn't have a leaking area. The Western Lehigh systems have made gigantic progress in their I&I reductions. They're not done, they're not perfect, but they're far better than they were. When you think about it in terms of the average flow coming in on a dry day basis, of the 32 million gallons that are typically hitting Kleins Island each day, about 11 million gallons of that is pure, clean groundwater, right? It should be going into the brewery and being made into beer, but it's coming into the sewer system, right? So that's an awful lot of baseline infiltration that is chewing up allocated capacity, right? We're still under our allocation. We're still under our capacity at the treatment plant, but from an allocation standpoint there's a lot left to be scavenged. The wet weather flow issues that we're having are still being driven by leaky sewers. And the wet weather overflows that we're having are really being driven by these manhole cover issues, especially the ones that are near streams, swales, run in the gutters, run next to stormwater detention ponds. But anytime we get any kind of downpour rain, we've got a lot of water going in there. With regard to the Lehigh County system, there's no amount of I&I removal that's left that's going to eliminate our need to expand our conveyance, right? Our systems reached capacity about 25 years ago. However, if we continue to move through the programs that we started 12 years ago, we will have been, and we will be, very successful at reducing how much that is, both in terms of length of pipe that need to get paralleled, you know, next to Spring Creek or next to Little Lehigh, as well as the size of those pipes or the size of those pump stations that have to get built. So the dollars that the partners have put into making their system tight are showing themselves, and they'll reveal themselves in our 537 capital plan. Next steps, nighttime weiring. We've completed the nighttime weiring in all of the Western Lehigh sewer partner communities about 3 weeks ago. We'll be rolling out for them their results. Generally, they're very, very good. The city of Allentown's work is wrapping up this week. I haven't seen those numbers yet, so I can't report on them. And we moved last night into Copley Whitehall to do work for theirs, and their leakiest of their 6, I think they've got 12 or 15 basins. We're doing their leakiest 6. Those are the only communities that elected to do nighttime weiring work. Together, they account for somewhere in the neighborhood of about 80% of the sewer system. So we got real good compliance is the right word, participation from most of the signatories on it. All these data are being used for all of the signatories to develop their source reduction programs. So it's what are they going to do to remove I&I, to reduce I&I out of their systems. We're going to use these data to select design storms. That work will start in July once the model calibration is complete. And from there, we'll start going through our alternatives analyses to define what the problem is now. We'll define what the problem is going to be in 2050. That's the end of our planning horizon for how much more flow is coming in. You know, the difference between what the system can handle and what the system's going to be asked to handle is our problem definition. And from there, we'll start to screen alternatives. That work will take place in the 3rd and 4th quarters of this year, into the 1st quarter of next year, with ultimately the final alternatives analysis taking place amongst all the signatories in 2023, and then the final selection in 2024, the vetting and the adoption of the solution for all that.
So part of the reason we wanted to have this slide on here is because Jim's here, and we have upcoming authorizations for some of this work coming up, either the next meeting or maybe in June. So if there's any questions we have for Jim beyond the I&I analysis that we can ask.
I have a question. Going forward to 2050, when I will not be here, I suspect none of us will be here perhaps. How do you build in climate change increase? Is it built in, number one?
So,
And number two, if it's not built in, is there talk about it? Is it contentious?
so it's interesting. So what we're building here is not your run-of-the-mill tool. Because it's, you know, if it was normally just me and Phil, we'd only come up with so many ideas, but the KISS community has so many different perspectives. A lot of things come up. So climate change is one of them. So when we go to pick our design storms for evaluating different solutions, let me back up a second. In the end, whatever we decide to pick as our solution, you're going to do that and you're going to run 23 years. We're going to use 2000 to 2023's actual rain events to see how it really holds up over time. But in the course of running scenarios, you can't run it, just too much model time. So we picked design storms around levels of protection. I think we're going to end up at about a 5-year, primarily because the model itself, once you get above the 5-year, the stream flooding, that picture that Lisa had up, that predominates, and it's impossible to accurately model that. So why try to engineer around something you can't accurately predict? So 5 years is probably going to be where we are. We are going to run sensitivity analyses though for 3, 5, 10, and 20. And what I've been telling the program steering committee is by 2050, the best science that's out there now is saying your 20-year storm will effectively be your 10-year storm. So as we're thinking about this, we want to keep that in mind so that we don't undersize things, right? The worst engineering decision we can make is to undersize something, right? You can always not build it and then realize you should have built it, but to build it at 24 inches and it really needed to be 48 inches, oh, what a horrible decision that is. So that's why we're looking at that flow projection at 2050. So we got a good 30 years of use out of this at least. And that's why we're looking at climate change. Some of the other nuance that goes into this though is, you know, we're seeing on our wastewater use, a real leveling off or even reduction of how much water we're selling and using because of the replacement of fixtures with high efficiency, right? So working that type of nuance into the system. And then finally recognizing that components that aren't rehabilitated will continue to leak a little bit more each year. These are all aspects of the model that we put in to try to build something that is, it's robust enough to use as a planning tool and robust enough to use as a design tool.
So, are the materials that are used today to build trunk sewers, the big pipes, are they more watertight than the old type of concrete pipes that we have in the ground now?
Yes.
Much more. Are they made out of concrete or are they out of plastic or what?
On a sanitary system, I would never, personal opinion, personal engineer's opinion, I would never install concrete pipe in a sanitary sewer. It's too subject to corrosion. And the joint systems on them aren't particularly good. My preferred material for trunk sewers and interceptors in the sanitary is what's called a centrifugally cast concrete polymer mortar pipe, which is a brand name of Hobos, right? There's a side product that's made in Saudi Arabia called Flow-Tite, but it's effectively sand mixed with polyester and fiberglass. It's spun into a steel form, and it's awesome pipe, really slick, great for conveyance, really high quality joints. That's my preference. HDP is also very good materials up to a certain diameter. In the end, though, your materials of construction that you specify are important, but the biggest mistakes almost all utilities and municipalities are making now isn't on the selection of materials, it's on the inspection of the construction. These developments that are leaking, they're not leaking because they put the wrong materials in. They're leaking because nobody was watching the contractor shovel slice that pipe, right? So that plastic pipe that's in the ground is really good pipe. But if you don't shovel slice it and it goes out around and pops the gasket, you're draining a half a mile of pipe through the 57 stone. So having highly qualified inspection is probably the biggest key to longevity over and above materials.
Do you have any idea, or do you need more physical inspections as to how much this I&I is behind the curb line, which is a little bit more challenging to remediate?
There's no techniques out there for doing that, for quantifying how much is beyond the curb line. That's the challenge. So, yeah, the best industry-based line of attack on this is to do what's called holistic sewer rehabilitation. It's not a find and fix, right? If you're just fixing the ugly pipe or you're just fixing the mains, you're not going to get a sharp reduction in flows. So Upper Mac and Lower Mac is an example of spent tremendous effort in the last decade doing just their mains. And they haven't seen gigantic reductions in overflows because the tap still leaks, the riser still leaks, the 4x6 transition still leaks. And so the only way to get flow reductions that are in the 50% to 80% range is to do all of those components holistically in the area. Otherwise, as soon as you seal one, it's just going to push off to the next place that leaks. But it's impossible to accurately quantify it given the tools that we have nowadays for how much is coming from the private side or even the lateral side versus the whole system. So instead you treat the whole patient rather than just an aspect of it. It's the only way we currently have of getting significant I&I reductions. It's expensive.
Individual building sewers are going to have to be replaced,
So
just on the assumption that a lot of them are leaking.
yes, but not replaced. We don't replace. We replace almost nothing nowadays, right? So we use trenchless techniques. So the most cost effective is chemical test and seal, chemical grouting. Cure to place lining of mains and then laterals is highly effective. It's generally inexpensive for the mains, but for the laterals, it's really expensive. But those are they're still much less expensive than digging things up. Typically, the only time we're digging something up is if it's already collapsed or it's so badly corroded, there's nothing we can do with it.
So does that mean that to fix a homeowner's laterals, they'll have to go inside the basement and?
No, not yet. Well, depends. In our system, in the Western Lehigh, no. All of the partners have already gone into 80% of people's houses in our system, knocked on the door, gone into the basement and done an inspection, a qualified inspection to say, whether there's a problem there or not, a foundation drain, a punctured floor drain, a sump pump. Once it clears the building line, most of what we have is either plastic or cast iron, which generally doesn't leak until it reaches the property line and it goes from 4 inches to 6 inches. And that's where the plumber stops his work and the line guy came, and it's usually sealed with a tube sock, right? And that's a big source of leakage right there. So that point is often just inside the private line, and in some portions may have to get dug up to be replaced. But everywhere from there downstream that leaks can be sealed with either basically robotic or remote systems. It anywhere from 2/3 to 1/4 of the cost of digging it up.
Couple of questions. Those 11 million gallons of the infiltration that we have, what percentage of that is cost effectively avoidable, in your opinion? Because you say you know the nature of the INIs, so we should be able to guesstimate that.
That's a business question, not an engineering question. The cost of removing leakage has got nothing to do with the percentage, right? So if there's a pipe from here out to the street and I'm going to rehabilitate that, it's going to cost $1,000, making up a number. It's going to cost $1,000 whether there's a gallon coming into it or there's 1,000 gallons coming into it. So the cost benefit of it is really driven by how well did I find the pipe that leaks the most that I'm sealing off. So that portion of your question that gets to where to do it is tied to that. Source reduction work is expensive. You only do it if there's a business reason to do it. So what would be the business reasons to do it? Well, there's 2 that I can think of in our system right off the bat. One is in doing it, I can spend $1,000 to save $2,000 in building a parallel line, right? So in that perspective, it becomes important. The second is I can spend $1,000 to gain 1,000 gallons of allocated capacity back versus having to pay for additional allocation or expand Kleins Island or do something somewhere else that's 2 to 22 times more expensive. So it's business decision.
So isn't the Act 537 plan gonna sort all that out, whether we convey it and treat it, or we remove it, really in the big picture?
Should be real easy. Yeah, I mean, that's just, yes, the short answer to your question is absolutely. The challenge is, imagine a big Thanksgiving dinner with extended family. And the kind of conversations you can have about what's going to get done with dad's money. And that's kind of what we have here is, everybody's got a different driver. The city has a slightly different driver than LCA, although those are coming more and more in line. They'll never be perfectly in line. And then the other signatories all have different perspectives. Some of them have growth drivers. Many of them have no growth drivers. It's very similar to what we went through when we formed the Western Lehigh Sewer Partnership. Mayes and Salisbury, Albertus and McCungy really didn't have any growth drivers. So, they're at, why are we bothered with this? This is not our problem. This is your problem. So we'll come up with engineered solutions for this. The challenge will be who's paying for it, what the mechanism, the rubric is for determining that, how quickly it gets built, and how quickly we can come to a political reconciliation for those aspects of it. The engineering solutions are tough. The political ones are, that's why she's trying.
I'm curious, at the meeting, I imagine McCudgy and Alberta's officials were rather pleased with the results.
Well, I know their engineers were.
But how about the 2 big townships? I would imagine they were not. They put a lot of money into this, and I guess because they have all these developments, they're still leaking.
Well, I think, so Albertus and McCungy still leak more than Upper McCungy and Lower McCungy.
As measured how?
As measured on a peaking factor, as measured on a RDII basis, as measured on a baseline infiltration basis. Lower Mac and Upper Mac started with relatively newer, tighter systems to begin with, right? So if you think of it as a tree with apples, Upper Mac and Lower Mac were starting with picking the apples off the middle top end, whereas Albertus and McCungy's apples were all over the ground. So as a percentage of improvement, Albertus and Macungie has been tremendous because they were so bad to begin with. It'll be the same way when we go into the city, we start rehabbing pipe in the city. There's going to be dramatic improvements in the flow characteristics in the older portions of the city, just because it's so old and it leaks so badly.
And also on the one graph, it showed out our trunk sewer, our trunk line between Albertus and Macungie. Look, it had a yellow color. It was a pretty high infiltration, I in there. That's correct, our line, that portion of the line's leaking pretty badly.
Yep. Yeah, so
Along the Swabia Creek.
that, I don't know if you want to throw that back up there. That's not our line. So LCA as an entity has done most of its due diligence from an engineering and construction standpoint. In 2015, Chuck, when did we do the?
That's the seal, 2016,
2016, we grouted all of our trunk lines. That was the Albertus Macungie line, the Briningsville line, the Upper Iron Run trunk line, I think, and the Upper Milford line. And so those are generally rendered watertight. And then you'll recollect in 2018, we had the really rainy year. We took advantage of that and we routed all the leaks from basically Shantz Road all the way to Spring Creek Pump Station. So our assets are generally pretty damn watertight up to that point.
Well, what is that?
Downstream we have.
What is the area right next to Albertus, between Albertus and Macungie, that orange, that area?
Yeah, so,
That's our, isn't that our?
so that's
is that
Sway,
more Macungie?
that's Lower Macungie, and that's Swabia Creek. And those are the collector lines that come in through there. That's exactly right. You've got, like as an example, for Albertus, it looks like for Albertus, their last 6 manholes are causing all the issues coming out of Albertus. So obviously they're about to fix those. So there's, we don't own all of the pipes that roll through those areas, right? Some of those are related to the partners.
I'm just trying to figure out how much frustration there is with some of the signatories with all the work they've been doing.
Well, I think so. When we started the program, their source reduction program in 2011, 2012, remember, it was supposed to go until the end of 2025. So we have followed the game plan. The partners have been incredibly loyal to what they said they were going to do. And so they always intended to do their mains and then move into their taps, risers, and laterals. And they're in that portion of the program now, the taps, risers, and laterals. It'll bump their numbers up from, really they're in the teens to 20s from a % reduction, up into the 50s to 70s as they get there. There are a few areas like H and Oaks that have a lot of illegally connected sump pumps, as an example, that was defined a decade ago, for which they just haven't found a political solution to something like that. So you've got to recognize that there's going to be some places where, and the city will end up being this way, where there's just nothing you can do about the leakage that's there. It's just part of the way that precinct is built.
Right. When I was a young guy, I worked for a contractor and we spent a whole summer putting in the original sewers in Ancient Oaks, original Ancient Oaks. And there's no wonder they leak.
I think people are reading into that more than you're saying.
There was no inspection, and we took the clay pipes, stick them together, and we would support them with pieces of wood underneath. Because I'm sure the wood rots away and they sink, and it was just.
Thank you for the shot.
Enough self-incrimination.
I just like to say a lot of these look like they were Boy Scout projects.
Real quick to that point, you mentioned inspections and lack thereof. What's the fix for that? That work's going in the ground and there's the plumbing inspector's supposed to be out there kicking the tires and they're not.
And when I was a kid, you know, we had an inspector for every developer's community, and that guy was there. He was doing everything, right? He was doing the roads and the curbs and all that stuff, but he was there 10 hours a day to make sure that the stuff got put in properly. It's labor in doing it right. You know, we have my estimate, about 30 years of period where most of the communities didn't want to take on that cost. The developers convinced them not to include that in their escrow and just dropped out. And so we're paying the price for that.
Pay now or pay later.
Can I just add on to that a little bit? one of the things that we've been talking about, Phil and I and the city and, you know, some of the municipalities is really looking at some of these things on a more regional basis. And one of the conversations actually we just had this morning was about standard specifications for new installations and whether there's a way we can get all of the municipalities to agree and potentially for LCA to play a role in managing or administering some of that. Whether it's for the inspection side or working on the manhole project and, you know, trying to attack one piece of this as a more of a regional thing. And so to some of your questions, Scott, about what the signatories are thinking or feeling about this, the conversations have actually been much more open now than I think they've ever been in at least my history of working with the municipalities. Western Lehigh Group came a long way through from 2009 board with Jim and Pat Mandis and Aural working that group. But now bringing the rest of the Kleins Island municipalities together, the conversations are a lot more dynamic and collaborative than I think they've ever been. So
I think having the numbers there, it's hard,
Yeah, that's
it's
the-
hard to argue with highly vetted numbers.
I think I would add to it, you know, I think DEP has come around to what Jim was saying, because back in the day, you definitely did inspection and developers didn't want to pay for it in their escrow. But now if a project requires a water quality management permit, DEP requires inspection. So if it's a big enough project, I think they've realized that it's an issue. Now, whether people do that or not, you know, that's another question, but it is in there. It's a great tool to sell it to the, you know, to the owner that it's DEP is requiring, and you got to pay for the daily inspection.
I think it's like everything else in life too. You get what you pay for, right? It's a lot of times what ends up getting thrown out there is the new kid. Right? It's not necessarily the person you want. Honestly, what you want is the old guy that's retired and doesn't give a damn anymore, because he's going to make sure it gets done right. But you know, there's a certain amount of training that has to go into a lot of these things, especially you know, when you're putting a pipe in. If I'm there before you bury it, I can see whether it's done right. But if I'm lining a pipe or I'm grouting a pipe, all this is happening based on secondary signals, right? You're reading pressure gauges, or you're listening to the sound of the equipment, or you're watching it on TV. And there's a level of expertise that goes into that, you know, yes, it's a cheaper than digging it up piece, but you've got to pay more for the engineering oversight. You know, we stopped calling it inspection. We call it construction engineering nowadays, because it's truly engineering that's got to take place for these things.
Just a quick question. Does your modeling is impacted by amount of I&I?
Tremendously.
So when do you do your final modeling? So you have to wait to correct all the I&I, collect data and do your modeling, or how do you go about it?
So the model, so you've got a meter at the bottom of a basin.
Yes.
And I've got the data for that. The model has the physical attributes, pipes that come in through that. And then it's got what we call foul flow. It's the dry day sewage. The baseline groundwater that's coming in all the time, and then the rainfall impacts. The baseline sewage, you know, the normal diurnal hydrograph, really easy. The baseline I&I, not too hard. It's the storm impacts that are hard, because there's antecedent conditions that have to do with, you know, how long ago did it rain? Is the ground already wet or not? Is the grass on? It's amazing how much grass on the ground changes, right? A winter storm, much more impactful on leakage, because it just goes right past the grass and the trees. They're all dormant. That's the challenge. So we calibrate the model to its current leakage characteristics. This is what it's doing right now. Everything you do after that is an extrapolation using the model of what if I removed the sheet runoff? What if I took half of it? What if I could find half the places? I can dial that out of the model. What if I do not just the mains, but the mains and the taps? So if I do the mains, I can reduce 20% of the rainfall induced infiltration. But if I do the mains and the taps, it goes to 40%. So you can model those things. They're still just digital twins of what's actually happening out there, but they're tools to predict, if I do that, how big's the pump station? I still gotta build have to be.
You can run different scenarios. That's what it is.
Hundreds and thousands of scenarios.
Yes,
That's what we're gonna be spending the next 2 years.
how much of an influence factor in the groundwater elevation that has been fluctuating significantly over the years? We had a period where it was really down low, really high.
So, yeah, so it's curious. It's a misnomer in sewer, in the sanitary sewer world to think of the groundwater table. The groundwater table is well below where our pipes are. You know, unless you're right next to the creek, the groundwater table is below it. But what you have is, what did you bed those pipes in? 57 stone, 67
Don't
stone.
better than anything.
And even if you haven't, it's been a disturbed material, right? And so it's got a much higher Darcy's coefficient, right? The engineers in the room know. So it acts as a French drain. So you're wicking to our sanitary sewer, all of that. In some cases, we're also pulling into it the surcharge stormwater trench that fills up, pushes it out, and then every place it crosses ours communicates all that water right into our trench. So it acts as a giant French drain. So what we're doing is draining that, slowly draining it first out of the stone bedding, disturbed pipe bedding, and then slowly after that, out of all the soil. And that's why the storm followed by a storm always kicks us in the pants, because it hasn't had a chance to drain it down. There's no, the sponge is already filled with water.
Let me correct myself, yeah, we did dump 2/8 stone on it. So that did act.
Backpedaling already.
Nice recovery.
Well, put you in jail, but-
Yeah, I mean, that.
That was pressure treated lumber.
You're getting thrown under the bus.
I have one more question. Could you explain again the 2 out of 3 gallons that are groundwater infiltration? Is that during normal dry flow during the day? Is that what you're saying, 2 out of 3 gallons?
So this is where this is a great question. There's a nuance to that. So could you go to the summary table that I have? No, up, yeah, that's 7. So like on this one, right, 70%. That's 70%. That says 7 out of 10 gallons on a day, on the total day, are groundwater. How does that number pick? We picked the 10 lowest readings, 15-minute reading, 20-minute readings out of the 10 lowest days of the whole 9 months, right? So that's the lowest of the low. That's true baseline. Right now, that number is twice that, 3 times that, because the ground is so much wetter. So those numbers are all from the driest part of July, driest part of August, and in the middle of the night. You start adding seasonal groundwater infiltration, you're doubling or tripling that number. Now, you can't double 70% and go to 140, right? But that much more water is coming in. So your percentage of sewage, foul flow of the overall water that's hitting Klein's Island becomes less and less and less. Right now, if we were to go out and just do it right now, that number might be 75, 85, 90% in that basin because of the seasonal changes.
So if I were to look into one of our sewers and I see a flow during a regular dry day, 2/3 of that is groundwater infiltration.
Yeah.
In this case, we're here.
Well,
And that's the best case.
that's the best case. That's in the drought of July. We go out right now, it's probably, for this particular basin, it's gonna be closer to 80 or 90%. Yeah, that's the seasonal.
That's this basin, the entire,
That's this basin.
the entire inflow into Klein's Island is what?
11 million gallons of the flow on a dry day, in the dry of
Not that. 11 million of the,
32.
okay, so it's 11 over 32. It's one.
It's actually probably closer to 11 out of 28, right? Because 32 is where we are now, right? So sort of the wet season is 32. Yeah, so a big chunk, real big chunk. If you think about it from an allocation standpoint and how allocation drives our business. Decision process.
That's sort of an industry average, did you say? I don't know, roughly 1/3, is that sort of like an industry?
Say again?
Is that sort of like an industry average? That's sort of like an average across the country.
There's no such thing as an industry average, but
I mean, the average. is-
20, yeah, if a quarter of your flow is groundwater, nobody's gonna drag you in for a consent decree. Even new systems, when they test out, leak, right? So, yeah, nobody gets too, if you've got under 20%, you've got a hero system. If you've got under 30%, nobody's gonna get very exercised. The beautiful thing though is those numbers get orange to red to pink. The return on investment is gigantic. Right, and that's the engineer's job, is to find those neighborhoods and not just, shoot a shotgun at it.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Great presentation and discussion.
Just to put closure on that too, if you remember, I have to submit a quarterly report to DEP. So DEP does have this analysis as of April.
And
Too
then,
early for a response, I'm sure.
yeah, that quarterly report was emailed out to all the board members for your last request. So.
Okay, great discussion. Thank you. Let's move on, I guess. Okay. All right, next on the agenda is the monthly project updates. Board package. And it's white paper and pages 15 to 21 electronic.
All right, so for this month's board report, showing items for the May meetings, we covered within the territory today, and then we have some new things coming up. Probably the most critical item to draw your attention to is the capital plan that we plan to bring forward for potential board consideration at the next meeting. We do have some public comments that we'll share with you, maybe some corrected pages, but we'll put all that together for you and review that at the next meeting. Just as an FYI, the county commissioners have invited me to attend their meeting on Wednesday this week. It'll be by Zoom, and I'm not sure how much time on the agenda we'll have, hopefully not much, but I'll cover a little bit of the capital plan and some of the strategic plan stuff that we talked about at the last meeting. Also, this is kind of a question mark, but at our next meeting, we're hoping to have the South Whitehall Township Emergency Interconnection Agreement available for board review and approval. That's kind of pending the solicitor's review from both parties. So we'll see where that is in 2 weeks. We have a couple of projects, one in water and one in wastewater. They're kind of sister projects for the indenture upgrades. This is kind of an annual set of projects we've been doing for the last couple of years now to address some of the items that are in the indenture report that we do for M&T for the trust indenture. So that'll be hopefully pretty cut and dry. And one thing we mentioned, where Jim mentioned, is that the design storm selection authorization is going to be upcoming. We have it on here for the next meeting, but that may be pushed to June, depending on how the discussions go and the discussions we're having. There's one project that is provided with an update, and is there any questions on anything else in the report?
Okay, thank you. Staff comments.
No staff comments today.
Those are comments. Public comments on any topics we discussed today or any other items? All right, no executive session called for, so at this point in time, we're going to adjourn. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.
Please have a question.
Yes.
I'm gonna vote out here.